Well, it's, I mean, I have to say too, I think there's, I think the Western thing and everything, it's very, I'm not saying that it's not women, because it's one culture. It's very masculinist, if you know what I mean. It's very much about, well, it's just driven by domination, you know, the way that one brings about even success is through dominating someone else. So, you know, I mean, it's almost like there's very little trust in actually the commons, in collaboration. And that is particularly very male, even, you know, and so I'm not saying women don't have that. Of course, we've absorbed that as well, right? But I do think that for some reason, both Islamic and Christian, look, they killed Jesus, the one person who actually had a non-dual experience. You know, he said, you know, he actually did. He's the closest to non-dualist. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. Yes. I and God are one. There's no difference. It was like non-dualism, and no one could bear that. And they killed him, right? And began disobeying everything he said from then on in up to now, right? They're killing everybody. But also it's based on a real domination. Because I want to go back to the Gandhi, because something that really I remember really always touched me about Gandhi was that, as you both said, he was very human. You know, he had this human compassion, right? He was very clear about what was wrong with the Western, you know, regime, etc. But I was very struck when he came to England at some point, and he was battling the fact that, you know, all the cotton was being taken and then it was being manufactured in England and then sold back and all of this mess, right? But he went to the mills in Northern England, and they were all women who worked in those mills, most of them, right? And they loved him. You know, it turned out they were totally there for him. He's there in his loincloth, and, you know, because they were, I think it's something to do with the fact they were women, to be honest, as well, but they responded to his humanity, and also he responded to theirs, because he said, look, he knew that for them, they're all factory workers, they're going to lose their job. But he spoke to them and they understood why their jobs had to go, ideally, so that everything could move back to India. Because, so there's also something about the very strong, I wouldn't make it entirely this, but there's a very strong patriarchy in the West, I think, a patriarchal consciousness, and not just patriarchy, but that and what I mean by that is dominant subordinate. It's whether it's with women, or whether it's with class, or whether it's with race, or whether it's with nature. You know, we always talking about fighting germs. We're always talking about, it's all conquest. Our agricultural policies are conquest. They're not working with. And that's and I'm not saying, I don't want to break it down to, you know, sex, you know, female and male, but it's what I see as a very, it's very strong in this culture. You know, and it's interesting because obviously India has patriarchy, but this is something slightly different. It's a very dominant subordinate. Everything's in that, you know, and we've had that from very, very early on. And Christianity made it stronger, for sure. But anyway, that's interesting. And women have been really kept out. You know, they have very little influence. Whereas even in India, I know there's a lot going on around patriarchy and gender, but there is more room culturally for the feminine, you know, for prakriti, you know, like you tell, you know, even though that I know the culture's, you know, got quite a ways to go to align with that, but here we don't have that. You know, it's literally pushed out. So I don't know how relevant that is, but I do think it's yeah, you know, it's part of it somehow. It's a very that fierceness comes from fear, and it comes from greed, and it's a very yeah, that's interesting.
Well, it also strikes me that it's a certain version of male.
Yeah.
it's a very particular version of male, which is male as the dominant, aggressive, you know, etc. Power, hungry, whatever. That's a particular interpretation of male as well.
But it's very dominant interpretation. That's all I'm saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, I know, I agree with you.
For some reason, we seem to have adopted that version.
No, it's just interesting that it is a particular version of male.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's not. You know, I mean, I think the Indian, for example, African version of male is very different from the kind of male that you're talking about.
Definitely. No,
so that's just. I think that's an interesting part of the picture.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in India, even honestly, like male and female, they weren't even that separate, you know, because everybody knew about Shiva Shakti and everyone had the feminine and the masculine in them, you know.
Yeah.
People dress similarly. I mean, yeah, it's I don't even know where to begin. What's happened? What happened to that, to such wisdom and such embodiment of the feminine and the masculine principles and the cyclical nature of things and just living a simple life. And, you know, just the fact we had so many festivals, like every third day was a festival in India, you know, because it was just celebration and just ways to be one with nature. And there was naturally so much fasting and feasting, and there was just so much going on, you know, these intricate, complex lives that people led. So, you know, I was just watching an interview with that Korean band, BTS. Are you familiar with them? They're like huge. They have been for many years. The 7 boys, and now they're men. And, you know, they're so feminine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And it just really struck me, you know, how feminine they are. And guys in the West would probably be like laughing at them, calling them like, you know, pansies, or like what are the words used for like a feminine man. But I think they're heterosexual. It's not even like, maybe a few of them are gay, I don't know, but it's just their way of being. But in so many cultures, it's just acceptable. You wouldn't think of that guy as gay.
That's right. No, exactly. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. That's right. Those cultures tend to be less fierce as well. You know, I mean, historically, I'm not saying they don't have anything, but.
No, maybe that's why this whole sexuality thing in the West has just gone berserk, because people have just gone crazy living in those tight boxes of what is male and what is female. And, you know, now everything is just about gender, right? I mean, I don't know. It just seems to be such a huge thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There's so much self-identification, you know, with being a man, being a woman.
Yeah,
it's like
being
huge,
trans,
you know,
or being trans,
or whatever,
or whatever. There's just so many. I can't keep track of all the things, you know. But I just feel it's so inconsequential. Like, if you, whatever you are, be it, and you know. It's just it'll literally bring down governments at some point. I feel like it's gaining so much traction and power, and people are being removed from posts they've been in for years, and you know,
that's right. Government, universities and things.
Oh, you see, I mean, this all has such a deep root, you know. I mean, what we're talking about, I mean, there's a root to all of this that is very deep, and it has to do with this like relationship to life as a whole, you know, which in India there is something that's traveled through time, right, from the ancients, and that is this kind of deep relaxation, you know, in relationship to life. We do not have that, you know. We just do not have that deep relaxation. We feel like we basically, you know, we have to kind of struggle with life. We have this fundamental relationship of sort of this combative relationship to life, you know, that is. So it's just, you know, I mean, that's why, you know, for many Western people who come to India, they you know, not everyone, but I mean, a lot, feel this sense of being more themselves. I mean, I know I certainly do, and I know Mary does, feel more at home, feel more themselves when they're in India than they do in their own country. It's because it's to do with this. It's deep, and it's fundamental, and it's what we love about India, is that sense of being able to, be at home in life, at a very deep level. Because we it's very hard to, that dimension doesn't really exist in the West, and which is why people struggle so much, and also struggle to have an identity. This is such a big thing in the West, right? Having whatever your identity is, to have it and hold on to it and promote it, because it's coming from that place,
Yeah, and I mean, I think Christianity did have a history of the mystics, and there were all these sects,
yes,
which were just hunted down and wiped out,
That's right. That's right.
So maybe, right. Steve, if he had lived a few centuries ago or whatever, would have been part of one of those things, I feel, searching. And it's actually quite a polytheistic mindset, which even existed within Christianity.
Yeah, it did.
But it was just pared down to till, and then
squeezed out. You're right, Suruchi, that element, because even in the Enlightenment with those thinkers, some of them were not just rationalists. Right?
Yes.
They were breaking out of Christianity, but then they were sort of,
and they were like, my idea of God, they were trying to establish that very personal love, like the Bhakti movement had, And the only difference that in India, it got incorporated and celebrated, the Bhakti movement, even though it was so anti-Brahmin. Imagine surviving the Brahmins. But in other parts, like Christianity, it did survive, of course. It's not like it didn't survive, but...
Spinoza actually is a very good example of that.
Yes.
I mean, he was like, considered an atheist, which is so far from what he actually was. He was kind of just tossed aside as an atheist, and that was that, but I mean, it's just...
I think I just want to go back to that point you're making, Steve, because I totally agree. It's like we have all this thing around gender, but it could be around anything, to be honest. But because we lack in our culture, because you're right, Suruchi, it all got squeezed out, right? It isn't that it's not there, because it's not, it's God is there, right? In part of our humanity. But and because there is not this deep existential at-homeness in the culture, in oneself, identities constantly, whether it's racial, whether it's gender, whatever it is, are constantly fragmenting more and more and more. But we don't seem to have the capacity, because we don't have that deep ground living in the culture, to just hold all that diversity. Whereas, in India, you have, difference is really accepted. That's what I love. When I first went there, I was like, oh, wow, right? Whereas in the West, difference is feared. It's seen as a threat, usually. And, and they're all competitive, it comes from the scarcity thing. But that scarcity, I think, comes from a lack of a deeper, a deeper place, right? And it's not that it's not there, but it's been pushed out. And even in women, they all got burnt, right? The women who had some capacity, spirit, were in touch with nature, was more manifest in nature, their connection to nature, and they were all burned at the stake, actually. So it's been, that spirit, that kind of depth of being, of existential, of beingness, has really been erratic, like pushed out. So then what's in its place? Nothing. Who are we? So you become this one, you become that one, and it's quite a problem, actually. But And
also, interestingly, in India also, the rise of Hindutva is actually the rise of the monotheistic mindset.
We're just going to bring that up, actually.
It's not just the West. It's here. It's very much here, And
well,
that this...
But I mean, Suruchi, don't you think it's in India because of the West? I mean, I don't think it. I mean, I think it is in India. I mean, Hindutva is what it is because of the West, as far as I understand it. I mean, because it's a very alien kind of idea.
Yeah,
to
I
India.
feel so.
But
You know,
people have taken to it like it's like the,
because that also ties with the global meme, the capitalistic, polarized, one thing, one leader. Like that's the zeitgeist, it's the times. And each one feeds off the other, like every nation getting more polarized or nationalistic, wanting to seek its pride and building up that tension. So I think it's like, I see it as one wave, because if you are trying to be someone, then it shows that deep within you are shallow and you are not. Like we want to be Hindu Rashtra, like, you know, that whole rhetoric. The interesting thing is it is finding hooks inside people.
Yeah.
It is able to hook people. It's able to hook the fear, the tribal mechanism very deeply.
Right.
And evoke a lot of insecurities and use that insecurity to power a certain ideology. I think that's very, they've done it so well, or it's happened so well.
And also when I speak to people, like just general people who are BJP supporters, the minute I start talking about what the British did, I can just see this wall come up. Like they will not, they're
Muslims, they totally.
But they just want to start the Muslim topic. Muslims did this, they raped our women, they killed us, they destroyed all our buildings. I said, what are you talking about? You know, what are you talking about? Like this happened thousands of years ago, and they didn't even take the wealth out of the country. They stayed here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you even know what the British did? But no.
No comment. Because there is that hidden envy or shame or pride, or there's some unfinished business with the British.
You're saying there's an unfinished business between Hindutva and the British, or what did you mean?
I was saying that there is unfinished business between, say, a Modi supporter, which is therefore Hindutva, and it's either secret envy, admiration of the British, or shame at being colonized and therefore feeling they were weak. Like there is something there which I'm saying is unfinished.
But all these Modi supporters, they love Hitler also. They worship him, you know.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah. I mean,
that's so weird. I mean, do they know what Hitler did?
They totally are for it.
Strong nation, strong leader, one nation, one ideology, one, like they confuse unity for uniformity.
But where, I mean, okay, so, I mean, I can see the power of the sort of global West, as it were, in terms of the influencing that. But where does it come from in India? I mean, why would people? What would it touch in people? No, but where does it come? What I'm saying is
unprocessed anger, unprocessed hate, partly unprocessed, partly fueled.
But anger about what?
About Muslim invasions, right? So from the 11th century all the way to 16th century, India faced several invasions from the West.
Right. Okay.
One after the other from kings who came and who also destroyed temples, who also did conversions and all of that. And that hurt and that wound is still very. I don't know if it's alive or it was deliberately
I think it was
pierced and evoked.
The BJP and the RSS have been working for years.
And feeding off that.
And feeding it because they wanted to build this army, you know.
Yeah, because obviously it must have been there to some extent.
Definitely.
But at the same time, there was obviously a lot else going on as well, because...
And also the British totally divide and rule, right? Making Hindus and Muslims hate each other.
That's right.
So obviously,
again, the divide and rule further. I mean, definitely a big ingredient.
So that was a big effect. I know it's very painful. The whole thing is really.
And it's all linked. Like it keeps coming back to the same thing in a way.
So many like tribes fighting with each other, and you realize you go back to it. Israel. I mean, everything is just like somewhere there's the British man.
Yeah, that's true. A big footprint there.
Or the Portuguese man or the Dutch man. I mean, like seriously, like, man, what is wrong with you? Like, I don't know. I'm sorry.
No,
Well, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. It's
you see,
because these conversations are not happening. This
No.
particular conversation, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know where to look for it, but it isn't happening barely at all.
Well,
I mean, it's because we've talked about this before, but the progressive movement in the West is not talking about this.
No, it's
They're
not.
talking about a lot of things, but they're not talking about this.
Mhm.
And that's because, you know, I always say this, but I think it's so true that, you know, India, you know, and not just India, but Africa and, you know, these other civilizations can't ignore the West, whether they like it or not, right? But, you know, we in the West have been able to ignore these other civilizations as if they don't exist, you know? So, you know,
or worse, you know, to continue to take from Africa. Particularly.
But I mean, but in other words, you know, it's like there's a sort of psychologically, if you're Indian or you're African, you can't ignore the West. Whether, you know, it's very hard to because of the imprint it's had on your own culture, right? Mm. Whereas in the West, we just don't even think about these other civilizations, you know. I mean, which is why this conversation is really, really so important, because it's not happening in the West. Mm-hmm. You know, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, lots of conversations and good ones, you know, are happening in the West, but not this particular one.
Mm-hmm.